And we're back.
Yep, we're
Another
back.
episode. What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm very, very good. It's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. Today, Chris is going to lead the charge. Let's hear it. We're going to discuss Kundalini. Let's rock. What you got for us?
So I've got a quote by a Kundalini aficionado named Gopi Krishna.
Gopi K.
And it is an introduction to his book, Empowering Human Evolution. And it's a collection of essays he's written. So it goes something like this. Gopi Krishna said more than once that Kundalini was the most jealously guarded secret in history. Millions may know of the most recent breakthroughs in physics, astronomy, medicine, chemistry, and other branches of science, but hardly anybody is familiar with a more important development, the discovery of an almost unbelievable potential lying dormant in their own brain.
Hot damn.
Yep. Kundalini.
So, this dormant energy.
Yes.
Kundalini. What do you know about it? What is the big G, Gopi K, coolest name on this side of the fence? What does he say about it?
So he gives it all the kudos and all the, he gives it kudos to it. And he says it drives human evolution. It drives all evolution, which is interesting.
Okay.
And again, yeah, it's just like an ancient thing. It's talked about in like a lot of cultures. Chinese medicine, it's like qi. In, I think the Aboriginals have a word for it. In Catholicism, it's like the sacred oil. You know, it's just this thing that it'll like bloom the consciousness in you.
Right. Like a life energy.
Yeah.
So, what's his story? How did he come to learn about Kundalini? Or what's his experience with it?
So, he's an Indian, so I feel like it's like a generally well-known thing in that culture. But he was a meditator for 14 years. And then one day in his 30s, he had like a spiritual experience. He had a vision. And he tries his best to explain it, you know, oceans of bliss and everything is consciousness and stuff like that. But then after, and he felt this energy rise up through his spine and into his brain. And they say it feels a lot like an orgasm, but in your brain.
Right.
Because there's a big connection between the sexual energy and like this kind of life force, right? You know, life force, sex,
procreation.
Yes, exactly. So this same energy that, you know, perpetuates life also perpetuates evolution, which isn't that like far of a jump logic wise. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, particularly if like everything is one thing, then, you know, it's the energy's all connected. So what was his experience of like how it happened to him? You know, because I guess is this what he was trying to do, or did it happen accidentally to him just during a meditation?
Yeah, it didn't sound like he was trying to do it. It just happened, but it was like a very violent experience for him, where he was like physically troubled for like a whole like years. Like he was having horrible sleep. He wasn't eating, and his body was just like very, very hot.
Just
so
like,
a lot of it.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, exactly. So then he spent a lot of time researching it, like going through like old Indian texts, and finding out like what was said about it and like what exactly is going on with him. And it's like, it's interesting because it's clearly a physical thing. It's a very physical phenomena. And So he made the conclusion that if the body isn't pure enough, like if your blood isn't clean enough, that this energy, there's a change occurs in the body, and it starts consuming energy like it's never done before. Like it's on like 10th gear kind of thing. And if your body can't keep up with it, it's just like dragged behind kind of thing. And it can be very troubling.
So what does he mean when he says that you need to be pure or clean?
Like quite like just like you need to have a healthy body.
Right.
So, like traumatic
Like
events.
imbalance.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So for him, he wasn't in balance, and then he had this experience, and it, I guess, had these negative consequences.
Yeah. So he warns
Serious
against it.
business meditating,
Yeah, exactly. Who knew?
But I mean, it looks like it worked out pretty well for him in the end.
Yeah, supposedly he managed to balance it, to figure it out, and to kind of sustain the experience. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's like a lot of people meditate and then they have like good experiences during the meditation or whatever, but that doesn't carry over into the rest of their experience. Or it does, but not to the same degree or not as much.
Yes.
But there are some people who can, or I don't know if it's an ability thing. I don't think so. But I think it's a practice thing where it's once you have established like yourself in that kind of state of mind, that you can learn to incorporate it more into your everyday life, right? Like I guess you could call it a spiritual practice even, where it's not about like how much meditation you can do or how long you can sit for. It's more about can you sustain that state of mind throughout your, days or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So in this book, what does what does he talk about? Just his experience with it? Is it a teaching book? Does he tell people how to do it?
It's a collection of essays. In regard to like teaching people how to do it, there's not much of that because number one, he doesn't know, and it's very specific to every individual because we all have different things that could be blocking us or everyone's different, right? So he doesn't really he gives like general clues, but a lot of it is actually about creativity and genius. And he says it's this Kundalini, it's this energy that flows through the body that gives rise to human genius. In ancient India, it was originally called Vak. And it was explained as basically like the giver of words. So there was always this connection between like the poet and this energy, and even today when we think about creativity, we think of it as something that flows through us rather than us like forcing this process, right? So that was really interesting. And something phenomenal happened to him where the day he had that experience, the next week he was writing poetry in 9 languages. And 6 of them which he's never learned before.
What?
And like perfectly rhyming poetry.
How?
Exactly.
What does he say about it? Or is he just like, I don't know, this is just this crazy shit happened to me and then I started,
Yeah, I mean,
Russian.
they say this energy awakens a part of your brain.
Right.
And somehow it's connected to like this
everything.
Yeah, this mind dimension.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an interesting idea about how there's a driving force behind evolution, which, there would be something's driving it or whatever it is. And then it's an interesting question of, like purpose. What is the purpose of evolution in the sense of, like on a grand scale of things, because you can look at it like in a micro world and see, oh, it's about survival and growth, right? And that's true for, let's say, like any individual being. But on a larger scale, like what's happening, like where are we headed towards, we being the universe, I suppose. What's going on? And I wonder if anyone really knows the answer to that kind of thing. But it makes sense to me that there's a driving force of energy which is experienced similarly or along the same lines of like procreative energy of life, giving life and creating life. And in that creation, that's, I think, where the creativity comes in, right? Because like the creation of different worlds is a creative process. Just not one that we're super used to. Do you know what I mean?
What do you mean by creating worlds?
Well, so like each life is its own little world, right? And like from that thing's perspective, and so the experience of the universe is multifold according to like each individual, seemingly individual consciousness, let's say. And so within that realm, each person, we'll just talk about people, but I mean, I would assume it applies sort of analogously to other things, but each person creates their world, right? And that is a process of creation itself, where you get to transform your life and your experience to some degree, under your volition of choice. So you get to decide how you want to be and act and react in the world. And so that act itself is creation. It's not necessarily creation of life, but it's more of a transformation, which is essentially a creation and destruction process. One thing's got to collapse before another one rises up again.
Yeah, we're yielding kind of like, this universal power in our own kind of microcosmic way.
100%. It's interesting that he popped out a few new languages, though.
Yeah, that's
kind of
wild.
cool.
Yeah.
I wonder, that's kind of, I mean, how do you even begin to guess what's happening there? Because it would suggest that there's some way that you can tap into that knowledge without going through the traditional learning process that we're accustomed to, right? And there's definitely intuitive knowledge that people experience, and most people have some idea of a gut feeling instinct to do things, and how things tend to work out worse when you don't listen to your intuition or your gut feeling, and you should have. And so maybe there's some way to access knowledge, voluntarily like that, as opposed to just when it arises in your consciousness.
I mean, he does explain it as it just comes. Like these poems were just like fully formed in his mind. They would just like appear, and then he'd just like write them down. I don't know if it was like as he's writing them down or whatever. But I mean, we still don't know where thoughts come from.
Correct. They just appear in your consciousness.
Right? He
which
makes
is a crazy concept.
It's whack. It's whack. The
It's whack, bruh.
I remember I read this book earlier in COVID. I got it right over here. It's called Gods in the Word.
Okay.
And it talks about the history of different cultures discovering language, and how like these sounds that we use to create words aren't like made up things. they're like physical elements, you know,
Right.
like tea, it's a physical reality, kind of like water, like it's just there, you know, and so there's this kind of like awakening. There's this constant talk, or this constant idea that I keep running into, that human or all evolution is an inevitable process.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the analogy that I've always liked hearing is Alan Watts, and he explains, he tells this story, and it goes like, so there was like 4 billion years ago, there was like a bunch of aliens, right? And they were flying through space, and they're just like, you know, going for a ride. Yeah. And then one alien said to the other, and the other guy's like, oh yeah, true. And then and then they fly by this rock. This is this dead rock. It's like, what? This is look at that rock. And he's like, oh yeah, nice rock.
Big rock.
And they ditched this place. Didn't really like it. 4 billion years later, they come back, and it's Earth. And this rock is all of a sudden, it's got people all over it, right? It's peopling. And Alan Watts would say, the Earth peoples just like an apple tree apples, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the seed, from that seed, you are guaranteed to get apples if, you know, the environmental conditions are right. But there's no making that apple seed a pear tree or a plum tree or whatever, you know? So he says the evolution of life into people is that same thing. There's this guarantee. It's like a blooming. I always dug that.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you think he meant that like the aliens came by and they were like to this big rock and they were like, this place is kind of cool. We'll hang out here for a bit. And then they were eating some stuff or whatever aliens do. They were just consuming it through their chest, and then they would like shit it out, and then that sprouted into the protozoic. I mean, like the single cell organisms that they don't know how they got to Earth, and then those became multicellular, and then, you know, a few million years later, they were like, oh, what? There's people.
Like, imagine like the meteor was actually just like a big giant ball of crap from another planet system. And it was just totally like, oh man, we got to put this somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, like we have green compost bins here where we put all of our food and, you know, biodegradable things. And it's entirely feasible to imagine the Earthlings just being like, we don't have space for this anymore. We're just going to shoot it off into space, see what happens. And then fire it off a rocket, and then that shit lands somewhere else. And then there's life. And then you're like, 5 million years later, there's 2 people who are just chilling over the internet being like, how'd we get here? We're alien poo? Like, I don't like that. What does that mean for my life? What am I supposed to do now?
It's quite natural. I'm not getting existential about it. I kind of like that.
You don't like that idea?
No, I do. I dig it.
Okay, so wait. Okay, there's so much to talk about here.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Well, let's go one step at a time. So, I really like the idea that, like you, I also like the idea that the evolutionary impulse of the universe is kind of inevitable, right? And one way that people talk about that is they talk about it like there's a creative designer of the universe. So it was done with intention, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be looked at that way. Well, you can look at it that way, and if that works, you know, then that's great. But I guess it's for other people, you can look at it from the perspective of what you were saying. Like, no, like we're the result of a design. And I mean, our DNA suggests that entirely. You know, you can, well, I mean, our knowledge is getting there in the molecular world, molecular biology or whatever it is, but they can predict all sorts of things just from like one strand of DNA. And what's cool is it's so unique to each person that they can, you know, I mean, the negative part of it is, I mean, the positive part of it is they can be like, hey, we found one of your skin cells at this crime scene. No more freedom for you. And then, I mean, and it's not unfair. It's somewhat reasonable, but, you know, like who you are is so contained in this tiny bit of information that's stored in every single one of your cells of your body that knows how to do everything for your body. So all the processes that go into creating who you are on a physical level, let's say, they're pre-coded, right? And then there's all sorts of like backup plans where, depending on your environmental situation, different genes will be activated, right? That know how to do things for certain conditions, like when you get an infection, your immune system knows how to deal with novel viruses and things like that. I mean, it doesn't always work, and sometimes you die, but sometimes you don't. Or, you know, with a wound, like your body knows how to heal itself, and you don't have to even think about any of that. That just happens. It knows how to metabolize everything. You know, I mean, if you think about how many processes are going on in your body at any given time that you're just unaware of, all of your cells are multiplying all of the time. I mean, there's a complete new physical you, like every 7 or 8 years, I think they say. You know, all of your cells
they're having sex, they're pooping.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're doing everything we do.
Creating more life. Maybe each little cell has its own consciousness for the time that it exists, and it's its own little ecosystem with its powerhouse of mitochondria that they taught us at school. You know, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and then you got your other little cell shit, and then they're like, okay, it's time for us to just what's that process called? Cellular division, or whatever it is.
Mitosis.
Mitosis.
Is it mitosis?
Yeah.
I think it's mitosis.
That sounds right. It's been a while since I've taken, you know, high school biology, but
yeah, I know.
It just keeps going. But and also, what's crazy is like we were originally like each person was originally one
cell?
thing. Yeah. 2 half cells, even more so. You know, and then we have this extraordinary DNA that just has the blueprint for life for this particular form, and then it manifests in all sorts of cool ways. It's that's pretty crazy to think about. And then you know, we're hanging out and we're like, I'm so stressed because I have this thing that I have to do tomorrow that I don't want to do, and you know, I don't like the way that my hand looks or something like that. And then all these and me too. I'm not exempt from it. Or I'm like, I don't have enough hair. Like I need more hair. It's so smooth, and then I can go down the rabbit hole of that kind of stuff. But then you're like, oh no, actually everything's good.
Yeah, it's all pretty.
It's all good.
It's all pretty good.
The mind is just having a little run at complaining for the day, and you're just like, all right, buddy, you know, do your thing. But so wait, okay, what is? So let's change topics. What is your, not change, but on the line of aliens we're headed towards, inevitably, right?
Yes.
Let's just put it like this. Do you think that aliens have visited Earth before?
Oh, okay. I see. Well, if we're assuming that our origin story is correct, then yes. But
okay, right.
But if not, yeah, I think so. Yes. What am I saying? Yes, I do. I have no proof. I have zero proof.
That's okay.
But I did meet a person once who claimed that they met an alien who came from another planet and whose skin changed color with his emotions.
Okay, like one of those mood rings.
Like a mood ring human. Right. So there was no lying on their planet because you couldn't hide it.
And okay, wait. So let's go one step at a time. Who's this person that you met? You don't have to give their name, but like, how did you meet them?
Okay.
Or do you know them well?
I don't know them well, but I met them on a retreat I went to in England, where I met a lot of interesting people. And so I trusted that person, you know, like it wasn't in a situation where I was just like in Kensington Market and some crazy guy was talking to me. Like she was a successful, successful, healthy human being, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, this ain't Skeptic City.
Yeah.
You know, we're here to hear people's stories out.
Yeah. So yeah, I met her in England. She's from LA originally.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you met her at this retreat, and one way or another, you were like, I believe in aliens. And she was like, dude, I have a story for you. And then, so what did she tell you? What was her story?
Well, that was it. I don't remember the context, like where she met him.
The alien.
The alien, yeah.
Right.
That's really it. That's really all I remember her telling me.
Right. So you're saying, so like, basically her story was like, one day, this alien creature I encountered and had a conversation, or
yeah, it sounded like a just normal context. Like it doesn't sound like he was hiding somewhere.
Right. Did she say what it looked like?
Human. It looked human, except it changed color.
And do you think that was like a malfunction?
No, I think it was just like a trait that the gene adopted.
Oh, I see.
Not even chameleons. Have you seen octopus do it?
Yeah, it's the
incredible.
craziest thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's unreal. And the technical plural of octopus is octopuses. I'll just throw that out there. And that's not even a joke. That's a real
If
thing.
you remember anything from this podcast, remember that.
Octopuses. Okay, so I see. So this thing came to Earth and was cruising around and looked sufficiently human to not create hysteria, but had this particular feature of, you know, had mood ring skin. And so, I mean, listen, my skin's a little bit mood ringy, if I'm honest. Like, if I get, you know, worked up or whatever, like, it goes red. I don't think when I'm sad it goes blue, but people have said that, you know, when you feel super sick, there's a tinge of green. So, you know, it's not out of the world to imagine that it's just a little bit more visible than that. Oh, maybe they had octopus's skin. That's true, as you were saying, you know. Anyway, so, I've met people that have recounted alien stories as well. And it's always interesting because I'm usually not one that's like, no, I don't believe you. You don't know what you're saying. You just made it up. It was in your imagination. I'm like, no, what the fuck do I know? Maybe it's, you know, maybe it's, I just want to hear the story. It's a good story. Like, tell me what's up. And so what did you say to this person? I'll tell you my story afterwards. What did you say to this girl? What did you?
Yeah, I was just totally with it. Like, again, like I'm just like open to it. I'm not there to like dissect their beliefs or whatever, you know. I was just, okay, cool, you know. I'll put that one in the back pocket for later.
Right. You're like, I'm gonna keep that one. That's a good story.
Yeah, I just kind of scratched my beard and hummed. Yeah. And then that was about it.
So, yeah, man, I want to talk to people like that. It's so cool. They're such cool experiences. So I saw this episode of a podcast where this guy, Travis Walton, who is one of the more famous cases of people being abducted by aliens. And they actually made a movie about it a long time ago. This was like from, I think it happened, I guess, like in the 60s or 70s or something like that. So this guy's story was that he lived in, I think, a small town somewhere in America, and he was a logger, like a tree logger, and him and his crew were like driving in the field one day or something, and in the nighttime, and sorry, all of a sudden there was this light that appeared that like encapsulated everything, but didn't seem to be shining like a bright light, like from a source. It just seemed to be everywhere, like to illuminate everything. and then they saw this flying disc, like some short distance ahead of them, and I think there were like 5 or 6 of them. And for whatever reason, this guy, Travis, he said he felt compelled to get out of the car that he was in and run towards it, right? Which is always a bold move.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have done the same thing, but I don't think he decided that. I think the way he recounts it, he's like, I don't know what happened. He was like, I just did. I felt the need to, and I just ran. And so he charged this thing, which was in the air as well, you know. Well, he ran, I think, and he said he got a bit closer, and then he like hid behind a rock, or he did something like that. And then all of a sudden, some sort of like beam or whatever it is, a beam of light, struck him. It came from this craft, right? It struck him, and it basically like launched him in the air. Like he flew a few meters and like hit the ground or some shit, and it knocked him out. And then later on, like the story that transpired. So there's 2 stories. There's the story of the guys who didn't leave the car. So they bolted. They were like, he's dead, we're off, because we're not, charging the aliens. So they bolted, but then they actually turned around at some point and they were like, we got to go back for him. We can't just leave him, which is cool. That's a good move, So they all drove back, and he was just gone. The craft was gone. There was just nothing left. I mean, there was forest and shit, but, it was like nothing had happened, but this guy was gone, and they searched for him, and he was missing for days, right? And people were like, what's going on? And the cops were suspicious of like a murder, as if like there's a cover-up or something like that. And a few days later, these guys, Travis, he like reappears somewhere nearby and like stumbles his way through town to like find a phone or something like that, to phone someone to come and fetch him and whatever, right? Then, so that was the other people's experience of the aliens, the craft. So then Travis now goes to recount the story of what happened, what he can remember of what happened to him during those 4 or 5 days that he was missing, right? So he says that he doesn't know how long he was out for. The last thing he remembered before waking up in this room was like running towards this thing. So he wakes up in this room, doesn't know where he is, doesn't know if he's on a ship or on he's just in a room, right? And in this room, he was like lying on a table, and it was like a fairly empty room or whatever it is. And then he said he was like, terrified, obviously, right? Because he was like, he was in complete like fear, panic mode, right? Then he said there were 3 creatures that like came into this room through the doorway that was in front of him. And they were, I think he said like 4 or 5 feet high. So they were quite small, but humanoid, but had very like big, smooth heads and big eyes, right?
Great.
Which is actually quite typical descriptions of aliens. That's one of the big one of the very common descriptions. And they didn't say anything to him. They just kind of stood and like looked at him. But he was in panic mode, right? And he also said that for whatever reason, he couldn't breathe properly. Said he felt like he was like choking. So maybe it was like an atmosphere issue or an oxygen thing, or doesn't know, or just, complete fear mode or whatever it was. So he says that, so he wakes up and he see these 3 things like moving around, and he could sense that they were like trying to communicate with him, but not through words. He said he felt like they were trying to communicate telepathically, but he couldn't explain exactly how he knew that or what they were trying to do. He later recalls that, because he's spent, 30 or 40 years thinking about it now, because it's been a long time, and he was like, what was happening or whatever it was, and his assessment of the situation was that they were actually helping him. They were trying to heal him from the wounds that he suffered from this beam of light, and maybe other wounds or something like that, but that they didn't seem to have any malicious intent. And if they did, I mean, he just wouldn't have made it. Like, he was like, it's obviously they didn't want to hurt him, otherwise they would have. Like, there's no reason that they were trying to but couldn't. Obviously, with like interstellar travel, you're not going, or interdimensional travel, whichever it is. So this guy, he wakes up and he freaks out, shame, as anyone would, right? Like, I mean, terrifying situation. And he picks up some object that he found, so it's like some glass cylindrical thing that he sees on a shelf somewhere, and he starts taking swings at these things, right? Because he was trying to like get to the door, but they were in the way, and so he starts like lashing out. He said he managed to like push one of them, or something happened, where he like hit one, but not like hard. He like shoved it, and it got up, and then they left the room because I guess they were like, we need to sort this shit out. And so they leave. He's still panicking, and all of a sudden, another creature walks in, but this one looked like a regular human. But so it looked like a human, and that gave him enough. And this creature, because I don't know if it was a person or not, it's hard to say. But so let's just say this humanoid creature, was very calm. Didn't say anything though. He was Travis was like asking him all these questions, like what's going on, how do I get out, like just full panic mode. But this guy just wasn't saying anything, and was trying to like gesture towards him to follow, right? And so eventually he just does, and he follows these guys. And so he follows these guys out of the craft, and I mean, not out of the craft, out of the room. And he's like, and he goes with him down this like long hallway or something like that. They're going quite like a walk, right? And they enter this room where there were like 4 or 5 other human-looking creatures, right? And they all kind of like look up and like look at him, and then he panics again, and he starts like taking swings, and then and then he says they managed to restrain him fairly easily, and he was also super weak at that point, and they put some sort of covering on his face, like a gas mask, I guess you could say, and he just passed out from that. And then next thing he knows, he wakes up like on the side of a road somewhere, right? Because they had then dropped him off nearby the original location on a road, and then he stumbles his way into town and this or that, and then that's less of the story. But so, I mean, there's a whole lot more to the story, and if you're interested in hearing more, it's actually, I heard it on a Joe Rogan podcast episode with Travis Walton that you can check out for the full count of it. But so that's a crazy story, right? And all of the people who was in the truck with him they all corroborated exactly the same story, except for the part where he was in this spaceship or something, because they weren't there. But the rest of it, all like 5 or 6 of them, it was just, everyone was the same thing. There was no hidden agendas or whatever it was. And there's a movie about it, and it goes into the details and whatever. But, this guy had this experience, and it's pretty wild. And that's just one of thousands of people's stories of abductions, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
And
interesting.
yeah, it's crazy to think about, you know.
I mean, I don't know if it's crazy to think about. I mean, we are technically aliens, right?
Yeah, no, I don't mean crazy like unreasonable. I just mean like it's wild it's fun to speculate and to imagine and to hear the stories. And it's crazy just in that it's unusual because it's just not what is most talked about or what's most often part of people's lives here at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows?
That's interesting. Do you think those humans were actual humans?
Good question.
Like
I had the same question. Now, there's many possibilities, right? So they were either humans and they just weren't speaking to him for some reason. Maybe they didn't speak the language because they weren't necessarily humans from Earth locally. You know, they could just be humans living elsewhere, speaking whatever else they speak, and having like fancy traveling and shit like that. Fancy traveling, space travel, like advanced technology. And so, yes, so then that's one possibility. Or they were like shape-shifting aliens that looked human, which is another possibility. Or they used telepathy or some kind of mental mind games to, like, I guess you could say hypnotize him into believing that that's what he was seeing, right? Mm-hmm. So, because, I mean, and that's the most sci-fi version of it, I think, for me, where it's like they are in your mind changing the shape of what they look like to you.
Oh,
Do you get
it? I see. Yeah, I guess if they could communicate telepathically anyways, that probably isn't out of their range of abilities. I feel like I've seen that in a movie before. I feel like that was a...
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's not I don't think it's an original idea of me, but because it's like, yeah, so your whole experience happens inside your head, right? It seems like there's a world out there, but you don't actually know that because you have a similar sort of experience in your dream when nothing's happening outside of you. And so it's very, it's plausible to imagine that someone could essentially hack your system and change the code of what things look like to you. So the information you're receiving gets hacked and then you think you're seeing something, but it's not as it appears to be, right? And you're right, like if they're telepathically advanced, then that could totally be a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to begin, how to imagine the science of that, but I guess it's within the range of possibility.
Yeah, for sure. My guess was, or my first idea was like these are actually Earth humans who have been abducted before, but like decided to join them. You know, and because I feel like if you were able to speak telepathically, words would just seem so cumbersome. Like just speaking at all would be unnecessary if you were surrounded by people who could understand your thoughts that you could express silently. Like you know what I mean?
It's an interesting question because you have thoughts that are like linguistic based and then you have imagistic based thoughts, right? And then there's like different layers and levels of that with like intention and desire and deception, things like that. But yeah, it's interesting because well, certainly vocal language would stop. And that reminds me, what was interesting about what this guy said, he was like, and they didn't have facial expressions. Their faces didn't move at all. And he was like, but that would make sense if they communicate telepathically. You wouldn't need facial expressions because the communication would be superior telepathically. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Now here's
It's awesome.
Now I feel bad for this guy. Well, I mean, I do and I don't, but what I feel bad for is like he's spent his life now trying to understand what's happened to him, and in some capacity trying to tell people his story. But for the most part, like the way he presents everything is under the pretext of like, but I have proof, right? And I think because so many people must just flat out, reject what he's saying, that he's always trying to like qualify what he says with proof instead of just living his experience. But that would make sense if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to tell people the story that happened and they're like, but where is your evidence? Then, I mean, you have to come up with evidence and shit like that. But so the other possibility is it's humans from the future.
Nah.
Yeah.
Nah.
Okay, so here, let me pose this question to you. If aliens popped into your room right now and they were like, sup, homeboy, because they have the vernacular and dialect of your region nailed down. So they were like, sup, homeboy, do you want to come on an adventure with us? Because they're cool, right? They're not like mean aliens. So they're cool. They're like, you don't have to stay here anymore. You can leave if you want with us, and we'll show you what's up out there. But you're going to be gone for you're going to be gone for a while.
No.
You wouldn't do it?
No.
Why not?
No.
What if it was like a year?
Okay, if it was a year, yeah, I'd do it if it was a year. But how can I trust them? I feel like I'd miss music. Like I'd miss just like humans. I like humans.
I like where your mind goes. You're like, man, can I bring my guitar? Like,
yeah, like do you guys even like music?
Take my piano with.
I mean, if they're into music, then I'll go. Like if they have like different instruments and whatever, I'm like so in. I'm super
new sounds
into that.
That you've never heard before.
Yeah.
Well, if they could expand the range of frequency that you're able to hear, you could essentially move into realms of music that have never been explored before.
Yeah. And who knows, they could possibly have like other senses, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Or do you feel like the ones we have are just like kind of like elemental senses, right? Because all these are is they break down vibrations into certain kind of I guess tangible experiences for consciousness. Like smell, sight.
Yeah.
It's all vibration. It's like these are they're filters for vibration, right? So like can you, I know it's weird, but can you try to imagine a different sense? Like how else could vibration feel? Like I feel like this is like covering all the bases.
Well, yeah, okay. So here's where here's my thoughts on this matter. So firstly, I think that the range of senses out there is far greater than ours. Even animals have different experiences of the world than us, right? And
okay, so variations of intensity on the ones we currently have, kind of thing.
Well, it's definitely that, but even beyond that, it's like, there's the electromagnetic spectrum of energy covers everything. So everything that exists is in some form, in at least in one way, described as a wave of energy propagating with a particular frequency, right? And at the one end you have like, I mean, not at the end, but in the middle you have sound somewhere along the line, and that's a particular range of frequencies of vibration. And sound itself is really only our experience of those vibrations by means of our ears, right?
Yeah.
And so the sound itself is just a particular vibration, and then our ears interpret that, and the systems translate that into information that's encoded in our brain, and then we experience that in consciousness as a sound, and the experience is not the same as the sound because it's an interpretation of it, right? And so, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. So there's certain frequencies of sound that we can't hear and that we lose with age, even on the higher and lower ends, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's certainly a
20,000
range of
hertz
things. Yeah.
is about the max.
Right, for human ears.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, in a different direction on the scale, and eventually you reach the light spectrum.
Higher, I would suppose.
Which is just, very high vibration of energy, but not different from sound. Just, I mean, it's different, but it's on a spectrum, right? And then it's totally possible to imagine that there could be something that in between those, let's say, or like something like X-rays or gamma rays, that there could be some sort of sensory organ that is created that is able to perceive those sounds. And actually, we've created those things not artificially, but through technology, right? Like we
What do you
can
mean?
read like an infrared camera, for example, right?
Oh,
Infrared,
I see. Okay.
yeah, like infrared light is everywhere all the time, but we don't have systems to see it, let's say. But we can develop a camera that is sensitive to those frequencies of light, such that when we look at things in the world through that camera, and then it's digitized into a frequency of light that we can see. So, it's not like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we
I'm trying
digitize
to imagine that
into-
for sound, but it doesn't really make sense.
So yeah, okay. So I don't think that you can imagine something new. I think
Mhm.
you could experience something new, but I don't know that you could imagine it with no prior experience. It's like try to think of a color that
Right.
doesn't exist, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there's some like philosophical debate about that, and if you line up a color palette of like blues or let's say something increasing in like darkness, and you cut out a chunk in the middle, would you be able to infer from the two adjacent hues what that third color looks like? Some people think yes, some people think no. But it's definitely plausible that like we could have different sensory organs to experience the world differently. And so, how do we get on this topic? I don't even remember.
Aliens?
Right, aliens. They can sense shit.
Right. You were asking me like
Yeah.
if an alien came by to pick me up, and I was just like,
and you were
only if
like,
they can
but
listen to
I like
music.
my music. And then
Yeah.
I was like, but what about alien music?
Yeah.
Put on some
Yeah.
sweet alien headphones that amplify
Yeah.
sound, and you're like, oh, I never want to leave.
Maybe they can just give me new ears.
True.
That'd be sweet. It's like enhance my eardrums or something.
Yeah. If you had to give up one of your senses, what would it be?
My eyes.
Your eyes.
Yeah, easy.
That was so quick.
Yeah, easy.
Not
I love
smell
I love
or
food too
taste.
much.
Oh,
No,
okay.
no. I love food. Food's delicious. Why would you not want to enjoy food?
That's
I
so
don't know.
wild that you would rather give up your eyes than your sense of taste or smell.
Yeah. I feel like I'd have in a weird way, like a more intimate relationship with the world.
Yeah, it would heighten all your other senses.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet.
Dude,
I don't know.
Can I tell you something funny? So I have this weird thing. I don't know what it is, but I have like somewhat of a sensitive nose, and I really don't like bad smells, and particularly like garbage, right? Like that's the kind of smell that I don't like. And when I smell it, I just become so angry for no reason. It just enrages me. And people make fun of me for it and whatever, and it's all good, but I don't know why it happens, and no one really knows. But it's like, I swear, if there's like a dustbin somewhere around and I smell some like nasty food or something, I'm just like inside, because I'm not like externally very angry, but inside I'm like, ugh! Like fuck, I hate this shit. it makes me so angry. So you could say that I'd be willing to give up my sense of smell. That's for sure. But
That's funny.
I do like really good smells too, because I have that sensitivity. So there is the good side of it as well. But I mean, you're so crazy that you'd be like, no, I'm going to go blind before I give up my smell or your taste. I suppose those are the same for the most part. Because if you cut off your smell, you don't taste anymore. But would you really do that?
If I had to choose, yeah.
Yeah, and your ears would be the last to go because you're a musician.
Exactamundo.
Yeah, I got you.
And there's a lot of deaf musicians. Not a lot, but there are a handful because...
That's true.
You can feel vibrations, right? So you can still play drums and stuff like that.
And you know what? Like, this actually ties back into what we were talking about in the beginning, because we were talking about how, like, artists during their moments of creativity feel like they're getting, like, downloads of information. Right? So the guy who writes poetry in 9 languages, he said that to him, his experience of it was just that these poems in languages he didn't understand just came to mind, and then he wrote them down. And other people were like, that's the shit, bro. And then, or whatever they say locally. And then, so what was I saying? Shit, I forgot now.
Deaf musicians?
Oh, yeah. And, okay, so musicians that are deaf, like, I think was Mozart the one who became deaf?
No, Beethoven, near the end of his life, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. And he wrote some of his most iconic shit deaf.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that's so wild to imagine.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Like, imagine
there's a lot of
blind
anecdotes.
painter.
Oh, that's weird. But you can't feel color. That's the thing. So, like, yeah, it'd be interesting, but there's still no intuitive way to know what you're doing. But when he was writing his music, like, number one, he was already a master. So, like, when he wrote notes down, the thing is, there's two levels of sound, right? We have the outer ear and we have the inner ear. Okay, so, like, the outer ear is, the vibrations that come through. But you can also hear sound without making sound. When you chant a mantra in your head, you say words in your head. You can do the same thing with melody, right? So when I perform, especially classical music, it comes from in here. I hear the sound in here, and then it almost like it happens on the instrument.
Right, simultaneously
so I feel,
or consecutively? I mean, it must be at the same time, because otherwise there would be a lag.
Honestly, there kind of is a little bit of a lag, but it's graceful.
Spot on.
It's rhythmic. It's like a dance. It's like, you move your hips and then your arms move with your, it's a sway kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's a sway.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a flow to it for sure. So yeah, he was already like a master, so I'm sure he could hear things in his head. But there are anecdotes where he would like cut off the legs of his piano and put them on the floor so he can feel it more and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel that reverb.
That is not what oh, I guess it is, yeah. Reverberation.
Yeah. But, okay, that's a good question, because I've seen people at concerts who I assumed were deaf because they were standing in front of the loudest speaker in the world and, like, feeling the vibration, right?
No, man, it's just fun.
And anyone else who walks past it, they're like, that shit's so loud. Like, But
yeah.
I mean, fair enough. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just super into it. But I mean, I'm sure that's not great for your listening. But anyway, because I've never felt music like that. I'm trying to think, like, I've only felt sound vibration in extreme, like, loudnesses, but it didn't, because that was just, like, all-consuming, right? It just, like, vibrates your whole being, particularly if you're in a car with, like, a heavy bass speaker, whatever
Yeah.
the thing's called.
Subwoofer.
Subwoofer. And everything just goes, you know, you're like, holy shit. So his shit is fine-tuned, I guess, that even the like classical notes, he can feel that to some degree. But you're right, I'd never thought about how when you talk to yourself in your head, or however you want to, you know, phrase it, that's actually, you some kind of hear it. Like you don't hear it, but you do.
Yeah.
Right? So you think you can create new stuff in your head like that? I guess so. Why not?
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean,
yeah, like I think in accents sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. You can change things all the time, right? You can mess with it. You can hear gibberish, and then you can visualize, which is like another, I guess, frequency of imagination or whatever. But
yeah, that's the seeing side. But wait, okay. So here's another point, right? When I'm showering, sometimes I like to sing, right? But I often sing in my head because as soon as I sing, okay, and it sounds good in my head because it's from stuff I've heard. It's not stuff I've made, but so it's stuff I've heard. And I'm like, or singing or whatever. And then if I start singing out loud, I'm like, this is so terrible. Not the song, just my rendition of it doesn't sound anything like it sounds in my head, right? And that's just a huge mismatch. But I guess because I don't have the same like vocal structures and practice and skill and whatever else it is. But it's wild that you can like hear something different in your head and then try it out loud and it just doesn't work. Does that ever happen to you, or is it just me? I mean, if it's just me, it's cool, but, you know.
No, it's definitely not just you. No, it's definitely not just... I've had to push. You know, it requires a leap of faith, you know.
What?
Singing requires a leap of faith.
Because
it's just what it is. It's just... I find like the way I would hear myself singing in my head, it wasn't something that I could like kind of like crawl up to or increase to. It's something you just have to go for, you know. You're singing, man. Just sing, you know. And I find that like that stuff keeps us back. Like when we're like, oh no, but it sounds bad, but it sounds bad, but it's you know, like that'll restrict you for sure.
That's true. But I guess for me, it's not even that it sounds bad. It just doesn't sound like it does in my head.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but that makes sense because one's a memory of someone else singing.
Exactly. You
They're
don't
not supposed
sing
to sound
enough.
the same.
Yeah, no, they never will really. I don't think.
Right, unless I sing enough that I can remember my rendition of it.
Exactly.
And what that sounds like to me. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy between how we hear ourselves when we speak versus when we listen to ourselves on recording?
I mean, probably because like the voice is like coming from in between the ears instead of outside the ears. You know, the sound is like protruding from like like back there, and so it's like a weird different space or whatever.
You're right.
I don't know.
I guess you hear it. You don't hear it. Well, I guess you hear it both through your ears, but also from within.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a different quality there. But if you ever find like a church or something, I recommend this to anyone listening. A church or a bridge. Go under a bridge and just sing under a bridge. The reverb is awesome. That is also what reverb stands for, is like how a space kind of reverberates the sound occurring in it. So you usually get these, you know, these big spaces, and you can go like, whoa, and it's like, it sounds huge, you know?
Yeah.
And I find like that's like cool. It's a really great way to interact with your own voice, because it's like everything sounds awesome. everything sounds awesome, you know? Like in a room, it's dry, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just things sound crispy or whatever, but when you're in that big space, it's just amazing.
Right, and
So,
when you
yeah,
hear choirs
recommend
and
it.
stuff like that, it's like everything's intensified. You know?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen those
Yeah,
cool
it's
like
pretty great.
architectural structures that are built for like that have, I don't know what they're called, I guess like fancy audio illusions, where like you can two people stand like super far apart from each other, where you wouldn't be able to hear each other talk normally, but because of the way that the acoustics work, it carries the sound to them, and so you can have like a long distance conversation.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah. I've done that
wild.
once. There's something like that.
Yeah.
I was in Chicago. And it's like a big U basically, and you can
Mm-hmm.
stand at the end, and the sound like travels against the wall, and it's like
Yeah,
the
and
person's like right beside you. It's it's wacky.
it's crazy. I mean, they're usually like art displays, right? Because it's fancy shit. But it's crazy. So it makes sense that in big spaces you're just like whoa, 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 you know. So wait,
Exactly.
Okay,
I'll take you one time.
Yeah, let's go to Chicago.
No,
nearby.
no. There's places in Toronto where there's like great reverb.
All right, caves and shit like that.
No, just bridges, mostly bridges.
Bridges,
Yeah.
man. Bridges. Whenever I see big bridges, I'm just like, how the fuck did that get there? Particularly
ya.
if they've got like pillars in the water, like across a river or a lake or something. I'm like, how did they build that? Did they just stop? They didn't just stop the lake. So how did they build the? I mean, I know there's an answer to it, but it just
saw a
seems
movie.
magical.
I saw a movie where one guy built an island outside of Italy's borders and wanted to declare it his own country. And basically what he figured out, just in regard to the pillar thing, is if you make them hollow, you can float them to wherever you want to go. And then you take off the lid and it fills with water and it sinks perfectly to the ground. But it also depends how
brilliant.
big this pillar is. Yeah, it was really cool.
That's brilliant. You know what else they have? They have oil rigs, like in the middle of the ocean somewhere.
Yeah.
That they just they build, and you're like, this is wild. Have
it's
you
really
seen?
cool.
I've seen a video of this building. I don't know where it was, somewhere in Asia, I believe. And they were basically moving an entire building. They had these like little like walker robot things. So somehow they picked up this building, like this much off the ground, right? So probably like 30 centimeters off the ground. And there were these little like robot things that would like shift and walk. So like they had legs, but there were like hundreds of them or whatever. And they just moved the building. I mean, I don't know what they did with the foundation, or none of it made sense to me. But it was like some extraordinary feat that was happening.
That is so wacky.
And they were just walking buildings around. And I'm like, there's so. I mean, civil engineering is just extraordinary. You know? We've built some crazy stuff as human beings. We don't think about it a lot, but we have.
Yeah, I'm always in awe in a city. Like it just
Me too.
It baffles me how like we're so how we built, and it's intertwining and everything's running fine somehow. It's so complicated.
It's a damn
amazing.
miracle that life in the civilized world works, and it's so dependent on so many different things going well, right?
Yeah.
Like even if you just take like electricity in your house, for example, that's there all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so much goes into that. So many thousands of people are involved in illuminating your house at some point. You know, it's the people at the power station who are keeping the energy going. It's the people who run whoever ran the lines, whoever built your house, whoever did the circuitry for your electrical systems. You know, there's all sorts of paywalls that you have to pay to have it done. You have the light bulbs that are fancy as fuck, and it's all magical that happens. And that's just one thing. And then we're just like, switch. No work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I know.
Or for water, like People used to have to build wells to get fresh water or wait for the rain.
Yeah.
And now we're just like tap on, tap off, and then you're just like, this shit's too cold. Make it a bit warmer, not that warm. I don't like it that much. This is all right. And then the water just flows somewhere. You don't know where it goes, but you don't have to deal with it. I mean, plumbing blows my mind recently. I've been thinking about it. And I'm like, how the fuck? Everyone's just so cool with their plumbing just working. But I'm like, how did this even happen? I mean, it's extraordinary.
Sorry about that.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my ringtone.
Nice. No, yeah, I was just saying it's extraordinary because we're just like, flush, it's gone. Where does it go? I don't know. How do they deal with it? I don't know. What happens next? I don't know. But I'm just like, all right, move on with the life, you know? Same thing with like garbage collection. I don't know where they take it. We just move our garbage around as creatures of the earth. Everyone's got a bunch of garbage and we're like, let's just put it over there.
Yeah. We have to work on that.
There. Definitely.
We gotta work on that.
But I mean, just the fact that it works. Can you imagine if like the garbage collection services just stopped?
Right. No. Yeah. I mean, it's happened before in cities, and then garbage just starts piling everywhere because we're ridiculous with it.
It's horrendous what would happen. I mean, our society is so dependent on those kinds of workforces that we just don't even realize, you know?
Yeah.
And we think that like banking is the top of the top. Or
right.
Or Wall Street or some shit. We're like, no, that's where it's at.
Shit.
Never mind celebrities, and never mind, it's just all these like people who are just keeping society functioning every day.
I know.
You know, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, man. Awesome.
Anyway, thank you, Chris. It is always a pleasure.
Thank me.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank me.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure as always. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you guys.